She thought their love was unbreakable. But everything changed after marriage. He became distant, secretive, and cold. Betrayed and heartbroken, she discovers the shocking truth that shatters her world. But as the pieces fall into place, one question remains: can she rebuild her life after the lies? Follow this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. Will she find the strength to move on, or will the past haunt her forever? It had all started like a dream. Their first date was on a warm spring evening, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Samantha remembered how David's smile had lit up the small cafe where they sat, talking for hours as if they had known each other for a lifetime. It was easy to fall in love with him, the way he listened so intently, his quiet confidence, the way his eyes sparkled when he spoke about his ambitions. She admired his strength, his passion for his work, and his gentle nature. And when he told her that he couldn't imagine a future without her, she knew she felt the same. Their relationship moved quickly, but Samantha had never been one to second-guess her heart. When David proposed just over a year after they met, she didn't hesitate. It was a simple engagement. No extravagant proposals or dramatic gestures. David, always the practical one, had handed her a small box one quiet evening, and when she opened it to find a delicate diamond ring, her heart skipped a beat. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady, but with the sincerity that had always been a part of him. "Yes," she said without thinking. "Yes, I will." Their wedding was nothing short of magical. Surrounded by friends and family, they exchanged vows beneath an arch of white roses, promising each other forever. They had built a life together, one that seemed to fit so perfectly with her own dreams. They moved into a cozy house in the suburbs, a place that had once been nothing but an abstract dream, now felt like home. Their home. It was everything they had hoped for: a fresh start, a clean slate, a place to grow. In the beginning, it was everything Samantha had imagined. They laughed together over coffee in the mornings, held hands on evening walks, and whispered sweet words in the quiet of their bedroom at night. There was a tenderness between them that made Samantha feel as though she had found her other half. The world outside their little bubble didn't matter. It was just the two of them, creating something beautiful together. But as the days passed and weeks turned into months, a change began to creep into their life. A shift so subtle that Samantha didn't notice it at first. It was just a missed phone call here, a late night at the office there. At first, she didn't mind. David's career was demanding, and she understood that. They had dreams, after all. Dreams that required hard work. She admired his dedication and the way he pushed, himself often working late to secure their future. But slowly, the late nights became more frequent. And the conversations that used to flow easily between them started to feel forced, mechanical. Samantha had always been the type to ask questions, to make sure things were okay. It was in her nature to be curious about how David was feeling, how his day had been, whether there was something on his mind. But now it seemed as though he had no answers, or perhaps he didn't care to share them. It wasn't just the late nights, though. It was the small things, little gestures that made her heart ache, the way David would avoid eye contact when they were in a conversation, the way his smile seemed forced, like he was just going through the motions. Samantha didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to accept that the man she had married, the man she had trusted with everything, was changing in ways she didn't understand. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, she looked at David across the table. He had hardly touched his food, his mind seemingly elsewhere. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken words. Samantha felt a knot tighten in her chest. "David," she started cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper, "is everything okay?" He looked up, his gaze distant for a moment before he smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, everything's fine. Just tired, that's all." Samantha nodded, though her heart felt unsettled. She didn't push him further, not wanting to seem like she was prying. But something in her gut told her that this wasn't normal. It wasn't just tiredness. It was something deeper. She just didn't know what. Later that evening, while David was in the shower, Samantha sat on the edge of their bed, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly. And then she saw it. A message. A message that wasn't meant for her eyes. It was a message from an unknown number, one that made her blood run cold. It wasn't the content of the message that made her stomach drop. It was the familiarity of the name at the top of the screen. Emily. Samantha had heard that name before. It was one of David's colleagues, a woman he often spoke highly of, one who seemed to always be by his side at work events. He had never mentioned her to Samantha in any other context, but something about the way he would light up when he spoke about her felt off. The message was short and sweet. Had a great time today. Can't wait to see you again. Samantha's hand trembled as she read the words again, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Was this the beginning of the change she had felt in David? Or was it something worse? Something that would destroy everything they had built together? She didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. Things were never going to be the same again. Samantha couldn't stop thinking about the message. The words from Emily replayed over and over in her mind, echoing like a haunting melody she couldn't shake. It was just a text, just a message, but to Samantha, it felt like the tip of an iceberg. Something small on the surface that hinted at something much larger and more dangerous beneath. The days that followed were suffocating, each moment thick with uncertainty. She couldn't look at David without feeling a gnawing sense of dread in her stomach. His smiles felt distant, his words hollow. He was there physically, but emotionally, he seemed miles away. Samantha found herself slipping into old patterns of suspicion, her mind constantly searching for signs, clues, anything that might confirm the nagging feeling that had taken root inside her. It started with the small things. The way he now spent. Long hours at work, longer than usual, often coming home late, too exhausted to talk. The casual touch of his hand on her shoulder or the soft kisses goodbye in the mornings became fewer, and the warmth between them grew colder. Samantha began to wonder how much longer she could ignore the whispers in her heart, the quiet voice that was telling her she was losing him piece by piece. She watched him closely now, studying his every movement, searching for cracks in his polished professional exterior. It wasn't like her to be paranoid, but something in her told her that her instincts had never been wrong before. The suspicion was eating at her. She couldn't let it go. One night, when David was working late again, Samantha decided she had enough. The gnawing uncertainty couldn't be ignored any longer. She grabbed her coat, stuffed her phone into her pocket, and left their house. Without a clear destination in mind, she wandered through the city streets, trying to escape. Her racing thoughts, but they followed her. She couldn't escape the idea that David was hiding something from her. Her footsteps led her to a small cafe near their home, a place she used to visit on her own, back when she had time for herself, before the marriage, before the weight of everything had settled in. The familiar aroma of fresh coffee and the soft hum of quiet conversation did nothing to calm the storm in her mind. She sat at a corner table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, her eyes distant as she let her thoughts spiral. Her phone buzzed in her bag, breaking the silence. Samantha pulled it out, half expecting it to be a call from David, but instead it was a text from Emily. Her heart skipped a beat. "Are you coming tonight? I've been waiting for you." It wasn't just the words themselves, but the tone of the message that struck her. It was intimate, almost possessive, and the fact that David hadn't even mentioned Emily once that evening made everything feel even more wrong. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. There was something happening between them, something that went far beyond friendship or professional ties. Her mind was racing. She wanted to believe that she was overthinking it, that there was some innocent explanation, but deep down, she knew. Samantha had always trusted her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her. David was having an affair, but instead of confronting him head-on, she made a decision, one that would shape the course of everything to come. She would gather proof, uncover the truth in her own way, and confront him when she had all the pieces. No more doubts, no more uncertainty. The next day, after David had left for work, Samantha decided to take matters into her own hands. She wasn't a detective, but she was clever and determined. She knew that David kept his things organized, his briefcase, his coat pockets, his desk. He was meticulous, almost to the point of obsession. And so, she began her search. The first thing she found was his coat pocket. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of what she was doing pulling at her chest. But then she pushed forward. She found a receipt tucked deep inside the pocket, dated 2 days ago from a fancy restaurant she had never been to. The receipt wasn't for the two of them. It was for David and someone else. The name was written on the bottom, Emily. Samantha's stomach turned. The pieces were falling into place faster than she could process. But she needed more. She couldn't confront him with just a receipt. No, she needed something undeniable. Something that would force him to admit the truth. And she knew exactly where to look. David's study was the one place in their house where he had always kept his private things, his work documents, his personal journals, his computer. It was a space where he had always retreated to when he needed to think. Samantha had never been one to pry, but today she wasn't just Samantha, the wife. Today she was someone searching for answers. She sat down at his desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the drawer. Inside, she found several unopened letters, most of which seemed to be from his colleagues. But then, at the very back of the drawer, tucked underneath a pile of papers, she found a small, faded envelope. Her heart skipped. The envelope had no return address, but it was addressed to David in elegant handwriting. She opened it carefully, her hands shaking. Inside, there was a single piece of paper. It was a letter that wasn't from Emily, but rather from David himself. It was a confession of sorts, but not about the affair. No, this letter was far darker. David had written about how he felt trapped, how he was no longer sure of his feelings for Samantha. He spoke of wanting more excitement, more passion, more freedom. He had written that the marriage no longer felt like a partnership, but a prison. Tears filled Samantha's eyes as she read the words. She had known, in some corner of her mind, that something had changed. But seeing it in black and white, seeing his cold, calculating thoughts about their marriage, it hit her harder than she expected. The love she thought they shared was no longer enough for him. She had been his wife, his partner, but she was no longer the woman he wanted. Her mind raced. The truth was staring her in the face, undeniable. She had caught him. He had betrayed her, not just with Emily, but with his own indifference, his emotional neglect. But what hurt most of all was the realization that David hadn't just changed in the ways she could see. He had changed in ways she had never imagined. With a heavy heart, Samantha set the letter down, her hands trembling. She knew that this was just the beginning. There was more to uncover, more to confront. But she couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. She was no longer the woman who believed in fairy tale endings. No, she was the woman who was about to rewrite her own story. And it would not be a story of betrayal, lies, and heartache. It would be a story of strength. The weight of the letter sat heavily in Samantha's chest, but it was the cold realization that followed, David had checked out long before she had noticed, that left her breathless. He had been withdrawing. For months, maybe even longer, and she had been too blind to see it. Now that the truth was laid out in front of her, she couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The dinner conversations, the late nights, the empty promises. It was all part of the web, a web of lies and half-truths that she had been trapped in, spinning a tale that no longer resembled the life she thought they had built together. The discovery of David's letter had thrown her world into turmoil, but it had also sparked something within her. The woman who had once been complacent in her marriage, the woman who had told herself it would get better, was gone. In her place was a woman who was ready to take action, who was determined to unravel the lies, no matter how painful or difficult the truth would be. The first thing she did was call Emily, or rather the number that had appeared in the text messages, the one David had hidden so carefully. She needed answers, and if David wasn't going to give them to her, Emily would. The phone rang twice before a soft voice picked up. "Hello?" Emily's voice was warm, casual. Too casual. Samantha hesitated for a moment, her throat tight with emotion. "Is this Emily?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "Yes, this is she." "Who's—" This Samantha's fingers gripped the phone tighter. "This is Samantha, David's wife." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of pause that spoke volumes. Emily's voice finally returned, now slightly strained. I didn't expect to hear from you, but yes, I know who you are." Samantha's heart pounded in her chest. She had prepared herself for this moment, but now that it was here, her words felt heavier than she had anticipated. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, keeping her tone as calm as possible, though her insides were roiling. Emily was silent, for a moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, she spoke, her voice no longer warm, but cool, almost detached. "It's been a few months. It started when David and I were working together on that big project. We were just colleagues at first, but one thing led to another." Samantha clenched her jaw, her vision blurring with unshed tears. "And you just let it happen? You didn't think about me? About what this would do to our lives?" Emily's voice softened. "I never meant for things to get out of hand. But David and I, we have something real. He's been unhappy for a while, Samantha." "He didn't tell you, but I think you knew." Samantha's grip on the phone tightened as her breath quickened. She had always known, hadn't she? The signs were there, if only she had chosen to see them, but she had been too afraid to confront the truth. Now she was left to face it head-on, alone. "And you're okay with this?" Samantha's voice shook, though she tried to hide it. With destroying a marriage? With hurting someone else? There was a long pause before Emily responded, her voice more matter-of-fact than apologetic. "I didn't want to hurt you. But David isn't the man you think he is. He's not the man he was when you first met him. He's changed." Samantha felt the sting of those words, as though a piece of her had been ripped away. She knew Emily wasn't lying. She had already felt the change in David, had already seen the distance between them grow wider, like a chasm that had slowly opened up between them, too wide now to bridge. "Thank you," Samantha said, her voice small and hollow. She hung up the phone without another word, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over her. It was done. The truth was out there, undeniable. And now, Samantha had to decide what to do with it. The days that followed were a blur of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. Samantha threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from the aching emptiness that seemed to fill every corner of their house. She couldn't look at David without feeling the weight of everything he had hidden from her. She couldn't talk to him without wanting to scream at him, to demand why he had done this, why he had allowed their love to wither in silence, instead of having the courage to speak the truth. David seemed oblivious to the storm that was brewing around them. He came home late, as usual, and when he did, he was distant, as if nothing had changed. He didn't ask why Samantha was so quiet, why her eyes seemed so distant, or why she no longer smiled when he entered the room. It was as though he was already living in a different world, a world where Samantha didn't exist, or at least, didn't matter. Samantha couldn't keep pretending any longer. She couldn't pretend that everything was fine when every part of her was screaming that it wasn't. And so, one evening, when David came home after yet another long day at the office, she decided it was time. She wasn't going to wait for him to change. She wasn't going to wait for him to suddenly realize the gravity of what he had done. She was going to confront him. David walked into the living room, setting down his briefcase with a sigh. "Hey," he said, his voice as casual as ever. "How was your day?" Samantha stood from the couch, her heart pounding in her chest. She had practiced this moment over and over in her mind, but now that it was here, it felt different. The air between them was thick, charged with unspoken words, a tension that neither of them could deny any longer. "David," she said, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." David's gaze flickered for a moment, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "About what?" "About us?" Samantha replied, her voice breaking the silence that had stretched too long between them. About what's been happening between us. About what's been happening behind my back. David looked at her, his expression momentarily blank. I don't know what you're talking about, Sam, but Samantha didn't wait for him to lie again. She knew what she had to do. I know about Emily, she said, her voice calm but cutting through the air like a knife. David froze. His eyes widened, but there was no apology in them, only guilt. Guilt that he could no longer hide. Sam, Don't, Samantha interrupted, shaking her head. Don't try to explain it. You've already made your choice, David. And now, I have to make mine. His mouth opened, but no words came out. And in that moment, Samantha knew. She knew everything. And now, it was time to move forward, to untangle herself from the web of lies that David had spun. The confrontation with David had left Samantha raw, vulnerable, but oddly resolute. She had spent days trying to make sense of the devastation, trying to understand how she had been living in a house built on lies. But no amount of reasoning could erase the hollow feeling in her chest. The feeling that the person she had once loved, the man she had trusted with everything, was no longer the man standing in front of her. David's silence after her words hung heavy in the room, but he didn't offer any apology, no words of regret. Instead, he seemed distant, almost cold, as though the emotional connection they once had been severed without a second thought. Samantha had come to realize that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that had been lost between them over time. The distance, the emotional abandonment, the slow erosion of a marriage that she had thought would last forever. That night, Samantha lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. The bed that had once been a place of warmth and comfort now felt like a prison. Her thoughts were spinning, tangled in a web of confusion. David had admitted to the affair, but it was clear he wasn't planning on ending it anytime soon. And why should he? He had everything he wanted. Emily, the excitement, the freedom from responsibility, the comfort of a wife who no longer demanded his full attention. Samantha had become nothing more than a fixture in his life, a shadow of the woman she once was. The next morning, the house felt suffocating. Every corner seemed to echo with the unsaid things between them. The silence between them was palpable, as though every word was too much to bear. Samantha had never felt more alone in her life. She decided it was time to make a choice. A real choice. Over the next few days, she began to pull away from David, withdrawing emotionally as she processed everything that had come to light. She spent hours alone in the house, sorting through old memories, photos, letters, anything that would help her understand how things had gone so wrong. The house felt like a time capsule of a life that no longer belonged to her. It was then that she stumbled across a small box tucked away in the back of the closet. It was a box she hadn't seen in years, one that held memories from the beginning of her relationship with David. Inside, she found the letters they had exchanged when they were first dating, the ones filled with hope, dreams, and promises of a future together. She pulled out a few of the letters, reading them one by one, her heart aching with each word. How had they gone from this passionate, loving relationship, to the broken marriage she was now trapped in? One letter stood out among the rest. It was the first one David had written to her, back when they were still figuring out who they were together. It was full of promises. I will never take you for granted. You are my partner in every sense of the word. I will love you with everything I am. It was a stark contrast to the cold, emotionless man who now sat across from her at the kitchen table. Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes as she realized just how much she had changed, how much she had allowed herself to change for the sake of their marriage. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten who she was. She had stopped being the woman who pursued her own dreams, the woman who fought for what she wanted. She had become defined by her marriage, by her role as David's wife, and in doing so, she had lost herself. Her fingers trembled as she closed the box and tucked it away again, but something inside her shifted. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that they could fix what was broken. The truth was clear now. The marriage she had built, the dream she had created with David, was a lie. The next day, Samantha decided to take a walk, something she hadn't done in months. She needed air, space, time to think. As she walked through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, she found herself at the park where she had once gone with David, where they had talked about their future, their plans. The bench they used to sit on was still there, though it felt like a distant memory now. She sat down and took a deep breath, looking out over the empty playground. It was here that she met Alex, an old friend from her college days. Alex had always been there for her, a supportive presence in her life, someone she could talk to without judgment. When Alex saw Samantha sitting alone, lost in thought, he came over and sat beside her, his comforting presence bringing an unexpected sense of relief. "Hey, you okay?" Alex asked, his voice gentle. Samantha nodded, though her chest felt tight. "I don't know. Everything's falling apart." Alex was quiet for a moment, letting the silence stretch between them. "You don't have to go through this alone, you know. You've got people who care about you." Samantha smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I know. But it's hard, Alex. I feel like I'm losing everything I've ever known." "You're not losing yourself, Sam. You're finding yourself. Sometimes you have to go through the hardest things to realize that you're stronger than you think." His words struck a chord deep inside her. She had been so focused on saving the marriage, on trying to fix what was broken, that she had forgotten about herself. She had to let go of the life she had built with David and embrace the possibility of something new, something just for her. She couldn't keep fighting for a relationship that was already gone. She began packing. It wasn't easy. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory, a whisper of the life they once shared. But she couldn't stay in the place that had become a prison. She couldn't stay in a relationship that had suffocated her sense of self. It was time to leave. As she packed her things, she found the old key, the one that David had given her. When they first moved into the house, the one that unlocked their shared dreams. She held it in her hand for a moment, remembering the excitement they had felt when they first started this life together. But now, it felt like a relic of the past, something she no longer needed. She left the key on the kitchen counter and walked out the door for the last time. David wasn't home when she left. He was working late, as always. She didn't know where he was, and for the first time in months, she didn't care. What mattered now was her future, the path she had to walk. Alone. The life she had once envisioned with David was no longer possible. But there was something else ahead of her. A new beginning. As she drove away from the house, she felt the weight of her decision lift piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect. But it was her choice, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right one. Samantha's decision to leave had been the hardest thing she had ever done. The months of heartache, the constant questioning of her worth, had all led to this moment of painful clarity. Walking away from David and the life they had built together wasn't just a physical departure. It was an emotional and spiritual rebirth. She felt as though she was shedding a skin that had once protected her, but now suffocated her. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe again. It wasn't easy, though. The days after leaving were filled with uncertainty. Samantha found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, far enough from the memories of David and their home, but close enough to the life she had known. It was modest, just a one-bedroom place, but it felt like freedom. The silence of the apartment, though initially deafening, became a comfort, a space where she could hear her own thoughts, her own heartbeat. In the early days, Samantha threw herself into work, focusing on the things that had once brought her joy before the relationship had consumed her. She took long walks, rediscovered old hobbies she had forgotten, and even started writing again, something she hadn't done in years. She poured her heart into her journal, capturing her thoughts and emotions, expressing what had once been locked inside. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, the shadows of her past continued to linger. The memories of her time with David, the love they once shared, the dreams they had built together, were never far from her mind. She often found herself at night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondering what went wrong. How had they gotten here? How had she become a woman who could no longer recognize the person she had once loved? One evening, as she sat in the small cafe near her apartment, sipping on a cup of tea, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. It was a news broadcast playing softly on the TV mounted on the wall. The anchor was speaking about a scandal, one that involved David. She hadn't expected it. The image of him flashed on the screen, looking just as he had in their wedding photos, though now with a seriousness in his eyes that she had never seen before. The reporter spoke of financial mismanagement at his company, and whispers of misconduct began to surface. The words stung, not because Samantha felt vindicated, but because she realized that David's lies were far more insidious than she had ever known. The affair had only been the surface, the tip of the iceberg. The deeper issues had been rooted in deceit, manipulation, and a man who had built his life on a foundation of falsehoods. She had always known that something was off about him, but she had never expected this. Her heart sank as she processed the news. She felt no satisfaction in hearing about his downfall, just a deep sadness for the man she had once loved. What had happened to him? What had made him so distant, so willing to tear apart everything they had? She couldn't answer those questions, and it didn't matter. She was no longer the woman who needed to understand him. She was the woman who needed to understand herself. Days passed, and the emotional weight of her decision began to settle in. Samantha knew that she couldn't stay in the shadows of her past forever. She couldn't keep letting David's actions define her future. She had spent too much of her life being shaped by someone else's choices, by someone else's actions. Now it was time to reclaim herself, time to become the woman she had always wanted to be, independent and free. But even as she embraced her newfound sense of freedom, there were moments of doubt. She thought about the life she had given up, the promises she had made, the dreams she had shared with David. She thought about the love she had once felt so deeply, the connection she had once believed was unbreakable. In those moments, the silence in her apartment felt heavy. But then she remembered the woman she had been before David, the woman who had dreams of her own, who had ambitions and a life to live. That night, after the news broadcast, Samantha sat down in front of her desk and opened her journal. She began to write, pouring out her thoughts and emotions as if she were unraveling years of confusion. She wrote about love, how it had been a force of hope and promise, but how it had also been something that could deceive, that could blind her to the truth. She wrote about betrayal, not just by David, but by herself, for allowing herself to become so lost in someone else's life that she forgot about her own. And then, as if the words were coming from some deeper place inside her, she wrote about forgiveness, not for David, but for herself. She wrote about letting go of the guilt she had carried for so long, the guilt of not being enough, of not fixing things when she had the chance, of staying too long in a place that didn't serve her anymore. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing David's actions. It was about releasing herself from the weight of them. She wrote until her hand ached, until the words on the page began to shift something inside her. She wasn't going to let this heartbreak define her anymore. She wasn't going to let the echo of David's betrayal dictate her future. She was going to walk away from the past with her head held high, knowing that she had the strength to move forward. The next morning, Samantha made a decision. She would take the next step, the one she had been too afraid to take before. She would return to the things she had put on hold. She would pursue the career she had always dreamed of, the one she had abandoned when her marriage had taken precedence. She would travel, experience the world outside the confines of her old life. She would meet new people, forge new connections, and discover who she truly was beyond the woman David had tried to shape her into. Samantha had always dreamed of writing a novel, a story of her own, one that was hers and hers alone. She began to draft the first few pages, pouring her heart into the words, not knowing where it would take her, but knowing that it was a step toward reclaiming her future. And then, as if in response to her decision, her phone buzzed. It was a message from David. She hadn't heard from him in days, and part of her didn't want to read it. But she did anyway. It was a simple message. "I'm sorry, Sam, for everything." For a long moment, Samantha stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She could feel the weight of his apology in the pit of her stomach, but she didn't need it anymore. She had already forgiven herself. She had already moved on. She took a deep breath, put the phone down, and went back to writing. The echo of her silence was no longer a sign of defeat, but a symbol of strength. She had survived the storm. She had learned to walk away, to choose herself, to embrace the unknown. The future was no longer something she feared. It was something she was eager to face. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over her small apartment, Samantha realized that her story was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest tales. Stay tuned for more emotional journeys in our next videos.